I really want to welcome you all. This is the largest crowd that we've had in the couple of years that we've been doing this. So I really want to congratulate all of the storytellers today. I have a feeling a bunch of you drummed up a little extra business, but we even have two alums from the class. Will the alums raise their hand? All right. So, and Anusha is a repeat customer, so we have a couple of people that have taken the class in the past and people that have taken it this time. I will start off by just briefly introducing myself and then telling you a little bit about what you've come to hear today. My name is Laura Sturza. I am a writer and a teacher living right nearby in Rockville, Maryland. And I have been working on a memoir of my own for quite a few years. The title is Better Late, The Making of a Midlife First-Time Bride. That's the guy I finally landed after all those years. We're celebrating our 10-year anniversary next week. So as a result of writing that book and publishing a bunch of articles that are related to the book, which is part of the whole process, along the way I got very interested in teaching, especially teaching older adults. I have a mom who just turned 99, and I watched how her creativity shined in the activities that she went to. And I wanted to be able to share with others what I have learned about the writing process, specifically memoir writing. And so for the last couple of years, I've been teaching these classes, and I want to give a huge shout out to the people that funded this. So it's the Montgomery County Arts and Humanities Commission that gave me a grant that has allowed me for the last 2 years to teach this class. And I just want to give a round of applause to them for doing that. And then along with them are the folks here at Holiday Park who have generously opened this incredible center to us and have provided all the support, all the staffing, everything that's made it happen. And the result is that students for the last 2 years have been able to take these classes at no charge. So I am extremely grateful to these two entities for providing these services to us, allowing us to have these classes. I'll just tell you a little bit about what's happened in the last 8 weeks. The students that you are about to hear they have spent 8 weeks honestly busting their chops. They have worked really hard. They have come to class every week, but not only have they come to class every week, they have gone home and they have done rewriting and reworking their stories. They've listened to feedback from one another during class. And we're very careful in how we don't do what might be considered a traditional critique where you say, well, that's wrong and that needs changing. What we do is we applaud one another's bravery. We celebrate what works in the story, what moved us, what touched us. And we ask questions. So oftentimes when you respond to a writing prompt, which is, I'll say to them, write a short story about someone important in your life. Paint a portrait of that person. And they will write for 10 minutes, and they will have the guts to read that piece right out loud immediately. And some of the pieces that come out of 10 minutes of writing are extraordinary. And some of them, they go home and they polish them and they work on them. And then they take feedback from me, which is not easy to do. I'm going to tell you, being edited by an outside person is not always fun. You've got your precious story that you wrote, and somebody comes in and says, consider doing this, consider doing that. And these folks do all that. They test it out. They try new things. And the result is, and then they've been practicing performing. So not only have they been writing, but they have been learning how to read aloud, so that they're not only storytellers on the page, but they are verbal storytellers as well, as you'll hear in just a few minutes. They learn techniques So each week, we would not only have a prompt like write about a person or write about an experience in nature or write about your home, whatever you consider your home to be, but they would also learn techniques, how to infuse a story with emotion, how to bring sensory details into a story, how to structure a story so that it has a dramatic arc that takes people along for the ride. And they've learned how to write outlines and how to give feedback to one another. So I will say that every writer here has different goals. Some of them are writing because they want to do a book or a series of essays. Some of them have never written and just want to learn how to get work down on the page. Some of them spent their careers writing, maybe technical writing, other forms of writing, and then came into this class. So we have this lovely mix of folks that are going to present to you today. And with that, that's quite enough yakking from me. I want to go ahead and bring out our first reader, and that's going to be Jackie. If you would start us off, please.
And I have a question. What do we do with the clipboard?
You can thank you. You can set your clipboards down. If there's time at the end, there may be a little writing exercise. We'll see if there's time. We've got a full slate of readers, but I'm hoping that there may be a little time. But for now, you can set your papers down. And for those who are coming in late, just a reminder to turn your phones off. Please turn your ringers off, set them on silent. Thank you. And with that, I give you Jackie.
Thank you for coming, everybody. A lifetime of occupations. My mom, Sandra, and her sister, Shelia, were twins. Although they weren't identical, my mom's brown eyes contrasted with her sister's blue eyes. Their mother frequently dressed them alike as children. They also differed in personality, with my mom being a shy introvert, while Aunt Shelia was a member of the high school cheerleading squad. They both attended a Baptist college near their hometown in Asheville, North Carolina, mainly because their older sister was there. At college, Mom found a quiet job in the infirmary, organizing supplies. My mom described herself as having no artistic talent and switched from a home economics major to English after discovering the requirement to design clothes. She excelled in English and always enjoyed reading. After graduating, Mom moved back home with her parents while her sisters married. Mom completed the obligatory year as an assistant teacher and got a job teaching high school English. Although she enjoyed literature, she was intimidated by teaching students only a few years younger than she was. Her principal, who was one of her former teachers, mentored her and helped her develop confidence in controlling the classroom. My mother taught high school English for about 5 years, and later in life she remembered praying for snow in the winter so classes would be canceled. She met my father through a blind date and laughingly recalled introducing him to her parents. He was not from the South, which was bad enough. He was also a Roman Catholic, and my grandparents, who were Southern Baptists, were somewhat scandalized. However, they realized their disapproval would not affect my mom, who had always been rebellious and stubborn. After dating for a year, they got married. As was typical in the early 1960s, my mom stopped teaching when my older brother was born. A few years later, a new dentist recommended expensive dental work to replace several of my mom's missing teeth. My dad encouraged her to have the work done despite the expense, aware that she avoided smiling in photos because she was self-conscious. A beautiful new smile boosted her confidence, and Mom pursued a degree in library science through part-time classes once my brother and I were in kindergarten. Degree in hand, she got a job as a librarian at my brother's elementary school. She left that job 2 years later when my dad's job took us to Florida. She never again worked outside the house. For her, this was no great loss. Her commitment to her husband far exceeded her interest in a job. As an anniversary present in the 1970s, my mom gave my dad a Spencer's Gifts poster of 2 chihuahuas defiantly embracing with the caption, It's you and me against the world. This perfectly captured my mom's philosophy of her marriage. Mom struggled with perfectionism, a legacy from her mother, who kept a lemony fresh house with newspaper laid over polished floors to keep them pristine. In addition to keeping her house immaculate, my mom spent extra time ensuring my brother and I excelled at school. She bought board games to teach phonetics and a record of multiplication tables put to music. At Christmas, we received more toys than we could keep up with. Perhaps recalling her childhood as a twin, we received precisely the same number of presents, with my mom telling us that Santa loved us equally. My mom was a sounding board to my dad and strategized with him to achieve his career ambitions. When my dad's boss was grooming him for a promotion and recommended more conservative clothes, my mom's perfectionist tendencies kicked in. She spent hours consulting clerks at the nicer men's stores. She became proficient in conservative men's fashion, reforming my dad's entire wardrobe and laying out his clothes for each workday. Mom attended social functions related to my dad's work, regularly playing golf with his coworkers and their wives. She'd always been athletic and she enjoyed golf, but she did not enjoy the multi-day conferences she attended each year with my dad. While her twin sister would have loved traveling and attending cocktail parties and dinners, my mom hated the attention to her appearance, and the trips brought out old insecurities. Weeks beforehand, Mom would assemble her outfits for each day, down to the details of shoes and jewelry. Her anxieties about these trips often eclipsed her pleasure in visiting exotic cities like Paris and Bangkok. As an adult, she left her hometown, while her twin sister remained there. And they got together only occasionally, since each was busy with her own life and family. In her golden years, Mom developed dementia. At my dad's urging, they moved back to her hometown and into a retirement community with options for assisted living and nursing care. The familiarity of her childhood surroundings helped as her dementia progressed, though my dad struggled to care for her as her rebellious streak morphed into an unpredictable temper. Her unbroken bond with her twin sister provided support when my dad passed away, and they talked by phone daily. Mom moved to an assisted living apartment as her confusion made daily activities difficult to manage. A second blow came a few years later when her twin sister passed away. Shortly after, my mom transitioned to the skilled nursing facility. One of the most painful parts of my mom's dementia is having to remind her that her beloved husband and twin sister have both passed away. Dementia has also stolen her ability to maintain a well-groomed appearance. Though she's no longer the woman who taught me attention to details of shoes and jewelry, she's still my mom. Nowadays, I spend an afternoon with her, enjoying a vanilla milkshake or a cafe latte. She lives only in the present moment and is teaching me a final lesson. Life is too precious to spend it worrying about the future. Thank you.
So beautiful, Jackie. I told you these people are brave. Just writing it and putting it out there. Beautiful work, Jackie. Thank you. Next up, I'd like to give to you Tricia Reynolds.
15th Street. The five of us lived in a white house on 15th Street in Columbus, Georgia. Looking back, I wonder how a Scotch-Irish, orphaned, drunk, cotton mill worker managed to buy a house for his wife, 2 children, and one on the way before his 25th birthday. During my time of memory, my father never drank a drop. He built a white picket fence and planted crepe myrtles in 3 shades of pink in our front yard. I would stare at their beauty against a clear blue sky, trying to decide which color was my favorite. I told my friend Glenda Fay that my father was going to paint the ceiling of our porch, and I had asked him please not to do that because it is the perfect shade of blue. Glenda Fay replied, "That's Hank blue." I said, "It's a beautiful shade of light blue. Why is it called that?" She said, "Goblins and witches hate that shade of blue and won't fly into your house." After the ceiling was painted, I decided that Daddy had done his best to replicate the shade of blue. The location of the house was convenient for us. My mother could walk to and from her job in the cotton mill a couple of blocks away. Daddy walked a couple of miles to his mill. He was a fixer in the mill. He repaired the large, heavy, noisy machines and kept them in good working order. He was over 6 feet tall and had long, graceful hands. They were hard as stone and looked like leather. The rumor was that when Daddy thought he had saved enough money finally to buy the house, he was told he didn't have quite enough. The Coca-Cola formula was created by Dr. Pemberton in Columbus, and he used it as a parlor drink for social gatherings. The success of Coca-Cola created very rich people in Columbus, and occasionally they would step forward and help those in need. This was one of those occasions, and we had our home. Linwood Elementary was yards away from our house. One morning as I walked to school, I stopped to admire Mrs. Clement's hydrangea hedge. They were large and covered with beautiful blue flowers. She was sitting as usual on her porch and asked if I wanted her to give me a flower. And I said, "I'll just look at them from here." I crossed 15th Street and walked up the terrace steps to our white Spanish-style school with the red barrel roof tiles. There I saw 2 boys hitting a little girl. When I saw her red hair, I realized the little girl was my sister. I ran toward them yelling, "Stop hitting her, leave her alone." When they wouldn't stop, I said, "I'm going to tell the principal, Mrs. Beard." And I ran as fast as I could to the principal's office and cried, "2 boys are hitting my little sister and won't stop." She looked down at me with cool disdain and said, "When boys hit a little girl and another girl is a tattletale, it's not a good day." I felt despair and hopeless, and then I remembered my mother was at work on the first shift, but my daddy was at home sleeping since he worked on the night shift. I ran back to the school to check on my sister, but the bell had rung and there was no one around. The schoolyard was empty. I ran down the terrace steps, across the street, past the hydrangeas, and into our house to my daddy's bed and told him what had happened. He immediately rose up, put on his pants, and said, "Go on back up to the school, Tricia." Later that day, the principal called me to the office. She was tall and imposing. I felt small and thin. She said, "I should have helped you this morning, and I apologize." The summer after graduating from Central High School, I became the 3rd generation of the cotton mill workers in my family. And 20 years later, in September, my husband and I moved into our brick rambler in Bethesda, Maryland. The following summer, when I stepped into my backyard carrying my 4-month-old son, there were 3 large old crepe myrtles blooming in 3 shades of pink.
Thank you, Tricia. So lovely. Among the things that happen in our class is that we get to know one another, and we get to know ways that we're different from one another, right? Someone who grew up in Georgia, we'll hear from someone who grew up in Sri Lanka soon. We get to hear stories from people's life experience that differs from ours, that gives us a window into their world. But we also hear elements of the stories that we relate to. Parents people who are real characters, people that may be very different from our family members, but we see glimmers of our family members in that. And among my hopes for those of you that are coming here today is that you feel inspired to go home and set your timer for 10 minutes and write a little portrait of someone that you know. These stories all came out of these 10-minute portraits. We'd set a timer and write. So thank you again, Tricia. Next, I'd like to ask Jane Slattery to read her piece for us.
Thank you. Big Jane. We called my mom's youngest sister Big Jane because she was the older Jane and I was her niece, Little Jane. She was not physically big in stature, but she had a huge personality and a heart to match. Big Jane was at least 10 years younger than my mother and was around the age of 30 when my siblings and I would enjoy adventures with her. I loved my Aunt Jane, and she made an important impact on the lives of me and my 4 siblings during our childhood. She was one of the youngest of 7 children, never married or had children of her own. We were her kids, and she was our fun second mom. Big Jane lived in Philadelphia with her parents and 2 unmarried brothers late into her life. My family lived fairly close by and would visit regularly. Big Jane would load all 5 of us into her 1962 Dodge Dart and head to Jerry's Corner, a huge shopping bazaar, to buy us whatever little toys and candy we wanted. With her generous spirit, she treated us like royalty. Afterwards, she would ride us around Philadelphia singing songs like "You Are My Sunshine" and sing a song of sixpence. We would all sing at the top of our lungs. She never cared about how much noise we made laughing and singing. Sometimes we argued over a toy, but we usually had too much fun when we were with Big Jane to care about fighting over anything. Big Jane was the secretary for the head of a union in Philadelphia, and she was very smart. Even though teaching was not her profession, she taught us many things. On weekends, we would explore ponds with her and learn about fish, bugs, and birds. She would take us to the Philadelphia International Airport in those days when we could get close enough to a runway and watch planes take off. That was an especially fun experience because we could watch jets speed down a runway toward us and lift off the ground right over our heads. We knew nursery rhymes and fairy tales before we ever started school because she enjoyed teaching us those stories and rhymes. Big Jane loved drive-in movies, and so did we. She never cared if we spilled popcorn or candy pieces in her car during one of those movies, and she always made sure the volume was turned up high enough to hear the voices from those old movies. That car of hers was an important piece of her life in those days. In the summer, she would often take day trips to the Jersey Shore, and sometimes a few of us were permitted to go with her. My grandfather was an auto mechanic and worked at the nearby Esso station. Pop-Up and Big Jane would let us look under the hood if he was working on her car, and she taught us how to wash a car and have fun doing it. We would haul buckets of water and suds down the steps of their house and wash her car with big sponges. Somehow, we would always end up soaking wet. Occasionally, she would visit our house in the evenings and play Scrabble with my parents. That was a game we were not permitted to join in with the adults because Big Jane and my dad would often have a dispute over a word or a rule in Scrabble. She could be stubborn at those times and would not back down. I knew on those nights that she had a temper, but it was never directed at us kids. As I grew older into my teen years, I saw less of Big Jane because I had other activities and schoolwork to keep me busy. We could not visit as often as we did in my younger years, but my memories of that wonderful, fun, big-hearted aunt live on with me forever.
I know you're all experiencing it, but I want to point to the craft in what our students are doing. Each of them, the details that they're infusing in each piece, the hydrangeas, the Esso station, the Dodge Dart, the Spencer gifts. All these are little touchstones that bring the piece to life and make us and elicit our own memories. Even for younger folks, if they hear someone talk with love about a particular car, it's a memory builder of what's the car that they remember. So this is the craft that they're putting into this. Once again, a hand for Jane. And with that, I'd like to introduce Steve Corbett.
Give peace a chance. On a cold, crisp, bright, and sunny November morning in 1969, I was awakened by a loud knock on my bedroom door. It was Dad. He asked me, "Do you remember where we're going today?" I rubbed my eyes, leaped out of bed, and yelled, "The demonstration!" "Hurry up and get dressed and come down to eat," he said. Moments later, my big sister Marge and I were wolfing down waffles with maple syrup, washing them down with milk. We grabbed our coats and bounded off to the car. As I joined Dad in the front seat of our green Ford station wagon, I could smell his Old Spice aftershave. My interest in demonstrations and politics began in 1968 when as a 12-year-old, I watched the entire chaotic Democratic convention on TV, interspersed with anti-war unrest in Chicago, as well as the more sedate Republican convention. Years later, I would major in political science at UC Berkeley, attend more demonstrations, and fight for a more peaceful world, one child at a time, by teaching and advocating for some of the poorest children in Maryland. Dad, inspired by his Christian beliefs exhorting "thou shalt not kill," became a pacifist, and during World War II, a conscientious objector, working in a mental hospital in Philadelphia and fighting forest fires in Oregon. Years later, he discussed Gandhi's teachings, philosophy with fellow seminary student Martin Luther King Jr., served as a Methodist minister, and then worked as director of church government relations at the Methodist Church headquarters in Washington, D.C., located between the U.S. Supreme Court and a Senate office building. Dad exchanged letters with MLK Jr. in the 1950s and early 1960s. He often spoke to his congregation of peace, the biblical imperative of turning swords into plowshares. He devoted his entire adult life to promoting spiritual growth and championing peace and civil and human rights. As we drove downtown, Marge started singing Peter, Paul, and Mary songs like "Blowing in the Wind" and "Where Have All the Flowers Gone?" And Dad, in a strong, slightly off-key bass voice, and I joined in. We had almost worn out the grooves of a Peter, Paul, and Mary LP Dad purchased in 1963. When we arrived downtown, we parked in the Methodist building parking lot. The streets were swarming with people. From the U.S. Capitol to the White House and Pennsylvania Avenue to Independence Avenue and much of the National Mall, the streets were filled with over 500,000 people. Cameramen perched on tops of TV network trucks, straining to get a panoramic view of the crowd. Dad walked quickly toward the heart of the crowd, as if every step would imbue us with his desire for peace. We struggled to keep up. We were bombarded with sights and sounds from the crowd. Marching protesters chanted, "Peace now," or "Hell no, we won't go," or 1, 2, 3, 4, we don't want your dirty war. A contingent from the Radical Students for a Democratic Society shouted, "Ho, ho, Ho Chi Minh, the NLF is gonna win." Dad frowned. There were no winners in wars. Everywhere we looked, we saw white and black, old and young, women and men, clean-shaven and bearded, all wearing black armbands. Veterans carried a Vietnam Veterans Against the War banner. Older demonstrators carried an American Friends Service Committee banner. Protesters held signs, including Silent Majority for Peace, Peace Now, Work for Peace, Effete Snobs for Peace, End the War, that's one of my favorites, and Bring them home now. Others held peace symbols and US flags. Marching on, we saw men carrying dozens of wooden caskets with the names, filled with the names of 46,000 dead soldiers. Starting on Thursday night at Arlington National Cemetery, 46,000 souls had walked silently, a single file, in an all-night vigil ending at Lafayette Park near the White House. Each held a candle in one hand and a paper with the name of a dead soldier in the other. The names were placed in wooden caskets. We came across a table selling buttons such as, "It will be a great day when our schools get all the money they need and the Air Force has to hold a bake sale to buy a bomber." Dad gave me money to buy buttons reading, "Ceasefire now," and "War is not healthy for children and other living things." I still have them. Dad pushed us to keep walking, and get closer to hear the speakers and performers on stage. After several speakers finished, Peter, Paul, and Mary performed, singing "Blowing in the Wind" and "Where Have All the Flowers Gone?" Chills ran up and down our spines as we sang along. Where have all the soldiers gone? Long time passing. Where have all the soldiers gone? Long time ago. Where have all the soldiers gone? Gone to graveyards, everyone. Oh, when will they ever learn? Oh, when will they ever learn? At the end of the day, Pete Seeger led the crowd in singing "Give Peace a Chance," punctuated by an insistent, imploring drum beat and his interjections, "Are you listening, Nixon?" or "Are you listening, Agnew?" after each verse. Dad smiled at us as we sang along with the crowd and felt the heartfelt desire, the sense of unity, and a hope in the air. As he smiled down at us and put his arm around my sister Margin and me, Dad seemed to be saying, "Peace is not a dream, peace is at hand."
Thank you, Steve. Now, among the things that I ask students to consider is doing some research to fill out their stories. And Steve's story is a beautiful example of how he looked up things, he did some sleuthing to remind himself of exactly what went on that day, to see posters, to see photographs, to jog his memory. And these are things that can help us as we're trying to record our memories. We can start a story by flipping open a photo album with people from our past and looking into those photos and looking into the faces of the people from our past and thinking about who they were, what they wore, how they dressed. These are all the elements that go into storytelling. And you can do this too. So just trying to share a few of the techniques that these students used. Thank you again, Steve. Next up, I'd like to bring on Anusha Dharmasena, please.
Who am I? The year is 1958. On a rainy October afternoon, with windows open to let in the cool air. I was born in a private hospital in Colombo, Sri Lanka. I was my parents' second child, named Anusha Sonali Fernando. My years of growing up in the capital Colombo were modeled after the British, from whom we gained independence in 1948. Life outside the capital was traditional and tied to ethnic roots, but many of us in Colombo had the freedom to explore life in the West. I was raised to enjoy the Christian faith left behind by the Portuguese, Dutch, and British. My father, however, was a Buddhist, and I was exposed to the Buddhist philosophy that intrigues me even today. I spoke 2 languages, Sinhala and English, and studied in my native language. Growing up in Sri Lanka meant going to an all-girls school unless you were a foreigner. The English language was fluently spoken at home in the British style, and I proved to be a blessing. From kindergarten to 12th grade, I studied with the same class. We built strong friendships that were fully bonded even today. I miss living close to them, laughing and talking about school days. Thanks to WhatsApp, I heard their voices this past week, wishing me for my birthday. I enjoyed my home upbringing and learned a lot from the various folks whom my mom employed, from cooking to housekeeping. Among the many things I learned how to be a good Sri Lankan cook, to keep a neat and tidy place, and learned the joys of hosting Sri Lankan style tea parties in the British way. I miss the various religious festivals celebrated by the Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims, and Christians. Life was always some party. In 1980, the year after I had turned 21, a big birth year in Sri Lanka, I welcomed adulthood. Many children at that age continue to live with parents until marriage, but the journey was different for me. I was fortunate to receive a letter of invitation from a cousin in New York to visit the USA. My mother fearlessly packed me off without a roadmap to a world I knew nothing of. I lived with a cousin for a year and left in search of my American journey. I was fortunate to find odd jobs I could do to save for my first year's college tuition. My ability to speak, write, and understand the English language held me in good stead, thanks to the British. I taught myself how to live in America very quickly and adapted easily. I lived simply in a basement apartment close to school where I was able to work, study, and pay rent. I educated myself with a bachelor's and master's degree. I was proud to be photographed with my mom on that day, as I was the first in my family to have a degree. There were moments of accomplishments for me, the immigrant who writes this tale. I was fortunate to make friends from various nationalities, an opportunity I would have missed in Sri Lanka. After those experiences, it was clear to me that my preference was to marry a Sri Lankan familiar with my culture. As the universe would have it, I met someone who lived and worked in Washington, D.C. We got married, I changed my name to Dharmasena, and raised a family. My move to Washington, D.C. took me to a job that coincided with my studies in the fields of information technology, research, and statistics. 25 years later, I retired to look after my mother after enjoying a proud photo moment with the first chairwoman of the Federal Reserve, Janet Yellen. God gave me 2 years to enjoy Mom and learn more about her. 44 years later, after living in this beautiful United States, twice the years I lived in Sri Lanka, I asked myself, who am I? Who am I? With parents and relatives gone to the heavens, children working and leading their own lives, here I am wondering about my next journey. Now more than ever, I can't help looking back on the early days of my life. Maybe it's the aging process that makes me reflect on life today. That simple Sri Lankan life, barefoot when possible, enjoying the sun and sand, eating country food and wearing country clothing, and hearing the native language, I have forgotten. I miss the kind people who are always smiling despite their economic disadvantages and who frequently respond definitely when I ask for help. How heartwarming. But then I now live in America, where I enjoy the seasons, the orderly driving on roads, and a freedom that's not boxed into. Okay, food for thought. That's not boxed. And a freedom that's not boxed into traditions. I enjoy the simple, uncomplicated life I have made for myself, learning to think for myself, cook for myself, care for myself, and made decisions for better, for worse. This life in retirement is what I now have, and I often reflect with thanks for the growing up years when decisions were made for me and for the opportunities that came my way as an immigrant. I think of the history of America and remember the rockets' red glare and the bombs blasting in air while our flag still stood there. No matter what the future brings, I will continue to build community with kindness, like those people with a smile from Sri Lanka, in this land of the free and the home of the brave. This is who I am now. Although I didn't come to make this country my home in 1980, I have made decisions that came with consequences I haven't resolved. I am who I am, a cross between island Sri Lanka and the American I have taught myself to be. So, tell me before I forget. Show me so I may remember, and involve me so I can understand. So help me God.
Thank you so much, Anusha. Thank you for your beautiful story. You know, we've been very fortunate. Each semester, we've had folks that have grown up in other parts of the world. And it's been so rich to be able, as I said, to be taken to places that we've never been before. So, and you didn't know how funny that line was, did you, Anusha? Because we don't think it's orderly here. All right, friends. With that, I'd like to bring up Denise Venezia.
Okay, my piece is called Furman. If my brothers and I asked, "Where's Dad?" we wouldn't be surprised to receive a response of, "He's on a call," or "out on a removal," "He's with a family," doing an embalming, or handling a funeral. Such was the life of 3 elementary-aged children whose father was the local undertaker. We were very well cared for, and my father's erratic schedule seldom interfered with our sheltered life in rural Pennsylvania unless we planned a trip. The simple ringing of the phone just before pulling out of the driveway, unfortunately, could alter our plans to go and visit our grandparents or begin a short family vacation. The funeral business could never be left unattended because of the delicate nature of each situation. My father, Alfred R. Furman, began his working career in the 1940s. Shortly after high school, he worked for a bootlegger in a coal mine, then served his country in the Army Air Force from 1945 to 1948. Later, he attended mortuary school and apprenticed with the Faro Funeral Home in Shamokin, Pennsylvania. He eventually bought a small funeral business in Monterey, PA, beginning a lifelong career. In 1964, he and my mother purchased a large Victorian home on Main Street in Leola, Pennsylvania. They began renovating it, putting his funeral business on the first floor and our family's living spaces on the second and third floors. He installed a morgue with a connecting office, rooms for viewing, visiting, and services. Included in the renovation where there once was a kitchen and dining area, now there are restrooms for attendees. They also converted an original wooden carriage house into a casket showroom and garage. My friends were always welcome in our home and felt quite comfortable in most circumstances. I had sleepovers in the visitation rooms. And we played hide and seek in the basement in between coffins and rough boxes. His work usually began with a phone call. Our family quieted down as we knew silence was mandatory. He had pen and paper at the ready, and we would hear him ask questions like, "With whom am I speaking? What is the name of the deceased? Has the doctor arrived? Was the coroner there?" Then he got the address and callback number. If it was a hospital case, he needed to know if the body had been released. If all was in order, he would change into a black suit with a crisply ironed white shirt and drive to make the removal. This could occur at any time of the day. If he needed assistance, he would request a part-time employee to arrive at the funeral home dressed and ready to work. My dad had a dry wit and a kind heart, and he could always tell a good story and was very likable in our small town. Once he was established, he became increasingly popular among the Amish. He gained their trust, and the relationship with that community expanded. When he had an Amish death, he would make the removal, do the embalming, and take the body back to the home before he even had a coffin ready. He built coffins to size. So once it was constructed and lined, he went back to the Amish home and placed the deceased in the coffin. To keep up with the demand, he eventually started creating standard coffin sizes and rough boxes, so that after embalming, he could then dress and place the body in the coffin for return. The Amish always requested the beloved to be brought back to their homestead as soon as possible. Traditionally, they then view for several days in their own homes. Barns often house the funeral service, which was and still is spoken in a combination of Pennsylvania German and High German. High German is more similar to what is spoken in Germany. There is no singing. Afterward, a long caravan of horse-drawn buggies travels behind our horse-drawn Amish hearse to a cemetery for the burial. The hearse is housed at an Amish barn and is driven by an Amish driver. My dad was also able to communicate very well in Pennsylvania German. Again, another aspect of his personality that this religious group appreciated. For the non-Amish funerals, the procedures differed a bit. Most families chose a casket of varnished wood or polished metal. A burial vault was used as opposed to a wooden rough box. Usually viewings and services were either on the first floor of our home or at a nearby church. Occasionally, there was the rare cremation. We lived in a very Protestant area of Pennsylvania. These procedures are still in place today with quite a few variations due to the expanded diversity in the community. And many new laws and safety procedures now exist that were not even considered when my father began his business. My brother owns the funeral home presently and follows the policies with great detail. There is so much more to say about this remarkable man, whom the Amish simply knew as Furman. He was an honest and dependable businessman that showed great empathy to grieving families in unimaginable situations. When his own viewing took place in our home, over 600 people showed up, and spoke to us kids about how he had helped them in their time of need. When my father died, I was 44, and my oldest brother was the age of 50. Also, since the beginning of my dad's career, he has been mentioned in several books and articles. There is even a gazebo in his honor, erected by the local Lions Club, commending his service to the community. Fortunately, we children benefited and learned about dedication and strong work ethics, not to mention how to do a firm Amish handshake. But truly, the soul of his character came from his heartfelt responsibility to all families that requested his services. Back in his day, he could have been called out to a fatal accident. He may have been asked to go to the home of a beloved grandparent's quiet death. He was enlisted as a witness to the finding of a murdered young girl. He dealt with brutal suicides, overdose cases, unexpected parents' deaths, and more recently, school shootings victims. But the most heartbreaking thing to me was seeing his casketing of an infant, so beautiful that the child appeared to be sweetly sleeping. He did this day in and day out while raising a family and being active in the community. This is why my father was a good man. His life has served as inspiration for me and my siblings to do our best and live up to his legacy.
Thank you, Denise. One of the things, and I know you all are experiencing it for yourselves, that you can see within these stories is the range of emotions that comes about in these portraits. That it's not just one-sided, that these writers are showing us all the sides of the people that they're describing. We get to see the hardships that they faced. We get to hear the parts of them that may not have been as easy to get along with sometimes are revealed in some of these stories. We get to hear the humor and the levity that can happen in a funeral home, children playing in a funeral home, that our people in our world have all these sides and dimensions, and that's what these writers have so beautifully brought to life. So I'm sad to say that we don't have time for you to do a writing exercise here, but I'd like you to pull out your clipboards, because I'm going to do what I do with my students, which is give you a take-home assignment. This is your take-home assignment. I encourage you to go home and get a portrait, get a picture of someone important to you in your life, and spend some time just looking at that picture. Think about this person, and before you write the story, write about some of the traits and qualities that you recall about them. All the aspects of them, the parts of them that were easy to get along with and love, the parts of them that may not have been as easy to get along with. Write about their beliefs, what's important to them, what are the things that drove them. Who are the important people in their lives? What occupied their time? What were their hobbies? What were their pastimes? What were their jobs and their careers? What were their victories? How did they look? What did they wear? And think about the details, just as you've heard here. Did they wear glasses? Did they speak with an accent? Was there perhaps some disability that they had to manage and work through? These are the details to include in your story. How do you write the story? Set a timer for 10 minutes. I cannot say this strongly enough. Setting a timer gets stories written. Set your timer for 10 minutes and write. You may be inspired to continue to write longer than 10 minutes, but come back a day or two later and spend another 10 minutes. You don't have to have a fancy notebook. You can have pad and paper. Doesn't have to be fancy. But I just encourage you to bring to life someone important to you, as you've heard these writers do here. And with that, I'd like to ask all today's readers to come up so we can get a round of applause for them and all their bravery today. Come on, Anusha. All right. All right, friends. Got a little photo op going here. And lastly, I really want to thank you all. These stories that these folks have written come to life through the interaction with readers and listeners. You all helped these writers realize their stories in a deeper way by sharing them with you. So thank you. Thank you for the gift of your listening, for coming out to celebrate with them. Thank you.